continue the French Revolution. Revolutionary Wars. The situation in France continued to be tense during the following years. Although Louis XVI had signed the constitution, he entered into a secret negotiation with the King of Prussia and Austria to send troops to put down the events that had been taking place in France. Before this could happen, the National Assembly in April 1792 declared war against Prussia and Austria. The French army sang a Marseillaise song composed by the poet. The Revolutionary War again brought losses and economic difficulty to the people. Now, this situation in France continued to be tense. So Louis XVI had signed the constitution already, but he entered into a secret negotiation with the King of Prussia. Rulers of other neighboring countries too were worried by the development in France and made plans to send troops to put down the events that had been taking place. The National Assembly voted in April 1792 to declare war against Prussia and Austria. They saw this as a war of the people against king and aristocracies all over Europe. Among the patriotic songs they sang was a Marseillaise composed by the poet. It was sung for the first time by the volunteers from the Marseillaise as they marched into Paris, so it got its name. The Marseillaise is now the national anthem of France. Rise of new revolutionary ideas. While the men were away fighting at the front, women were left to cope with the task of earning a living and looking after the family. Large section of the population were convinced that the revolution had to be carried further, as the Constitution of 1791 gave political rights only to the richer section of a society. So, they formed a political club, become an important rallying point for the people who wished to discuss government policies. The most successful of this club was that of the Jacobins under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre, which got its name from the former convent of Sir Jacobin in Paris. Now, the revolutionary was brought losses and many economic difficulties, and men were away fighting at the front, and women, what they have to do, they have to cope with the task for the earning for living and looking after the families. And many large section of the population were convinced by that the revolution had to be carried further, as the Constitution of 1791 gave political rights only to the richer section. And in this, even many women too who had been active throughout this period, and they formed their own club. Yes. And in this, the member of the Jacobin clubs belongs mainly to the less prosperous section of society. Like they included like a small shopkeeper, artisans, shoemakers, watchmakers, printers, as well as daily wage workers. The leader was Maximilien Robespierre. A large group among the Jacobins decided to start wearing a long striped trousers similar to those worn by the dock workers. Let's move on to the other one, French Republic. On 10th August 1792, the Jacobins stormed the palace of the Tourist Masquerade, the King Guards, and held the king himself the hostage and later imprisoned by assembly. In the following election, only the men of above 21 and above, regardless their wealth, got the right to vote. The Jacobins under Robespierre won elections. So, on 21st September 1792, Assembly abolished the monarchy and declared France a republic under Robespierre and renamed Assembly as Convention. On 21st January 1793, Louis XVI was guillotined publicly at the place of de la Concorde at the charge of treason. The Queen, Marie Antoinette, met with the same fate shortly after. Robespierre's state policy. Robespierre's government issued a law placing a maximum ceiling on wages and rationed meat. Yes, now, and even the peasants were forced to transport the grains to the cities and sell it at the price which fixed by the government. Expensive white flour was banned, and all citizens were required to eat the bread made of whole wheat. And even equality was also sought to be practiced through forms of speech and addresses. Instead of traditional sir and madam, all Frenchmen and women were henceforth citizen. Churches were shut down and the buildings converted to be barracks or offices. The Reign of Terror. The period from 1793 to 1794 is called the Reign of Terror. Robespierre, the head of the Jacobin club, followed the policy of severe control and punishment. The clergymen and the nobles and the people who were considered enemies to the republic were guillotined. He even ordered the killing of its own party member who did not agree to this method and ways. At the last, rule of directory. The fall of the Jacobin government allowed a wealthier middle class to seize power. A new constitution was introduced which denied the vote to non-propertied section of society. It provided for 2 elected legislative councils and then appointed a directory and executive made up of 5 members. This was meant as a safeguard against the concentration of power in a one-man executive as under the Jacobins. However, the directors often clashed with the legislative councils, who then sought to dismiss them. The political instability of the dictator, the political instability of the directory paved the way for the rise of the military dictator and Napoleon Bonaparte. So in this, it was the fall of Jacobin government and they allowed the wealthier middle class to seize power. And the new constitution was introduced and they've denied no votes to the non-propertied section of society. It provided for 2 elected legislative councils, then appointed a directory and executive made up of 5 members. This was meant as a safeguard against the concentration of power, one-man executive as under the Jacobins. However, a directors often clashed with the legislative council, who then sought to dismiss them. So because of this political instability of directory paved the way for the rise of military dictator Napoleon Bonaparte. Through all these changes in the form of government, the ideals of freedom, of equality before the law, and fraternity remain inspiring ideals that motivated political movement in France and rest of Europe during the following century. So far we have discussed about the Reign of Terror, the directory rules frames, Robespierre, yes, and when it was a revolution, it was happened. Thank you, students.